Honestly, little lady, you've had enough. Time for you to go home before you get yourself into a situation you can't handle. The voice was a gravelly mix of cheap whiskey and unearned authority, a sound that scraped the air in the crowded sawdust-strewn bar. The crowd, a motley collection of local roughnecks and bored college kids, snickered. They saw the scene play out exactly as their assumptions dictated. A large barrel-chested bouncer named Decker, his arms thick as tree limbs and covered in faded, regrettable tattoos, looming over a woman who seemed almost comically out of place. She was slight of build, dressed in worn jeans and a plain gray t-shirt that hung loosely on her frame, her dark hair pulled back in a simple, functional ponytail. She had said nothing, done nothing but sit at the bar, nursing a single glass of water for the better part of an hour, her gaze distant, fixed on the middle distance, as if watching a film only she could see. Her silence, her utter stillness, had irritated Decker, a man who measured his existence in decibels and dominance. He saw her as an easy target, a quiet mouse to be swept out. When she didn't immediately respond to his command, his irritation curdled into aggression. He reached out and slapped her, not hard enough to cause serious injury, but with a sharp, stinging crack designed for maximum humiliation. The sound cut through the bar's dull roar, and the laughter that followed was nervous, complicit. The woman absorbed the blow without a flinch. Her head didn't snap back, her body didn't recoil. She simply took the impact, a subtle tightening around her eyes, the only acknowledgement of the assault. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't cry out, she didn't even meet his gaze. Instead, her focus remained unbroken, her posture a study in absolute, unshakable calm. But across the room, tucked away in a dark corner booth, an old man with eyes the color of a winter sea saw something else entirely. He wasn't a local. He was just passing through, a retired admiral named Vance, a man who had spent a lifetime studying the nuances of conflict and character. He hadn't seen the slap itself, not really. What he saw was the aftermath. He saw the way her center of gravity remained perfectly stable, the way she absorbed the kinetic energy without losing her base. He saw the almost imperceptible shift in her stance, her feet subtly widening, her weight settling into a lower, more grounded position. It wasn't the posture of a victim. It was the coiled, patient posture of a predator. The admiral leaned forward, his forgotten dinner growing cold, a ghost of a memory stirring in the deep recesses of his mind. He had seen that stance before in the blistering deserts of Afghanistan and on the rain-slicked decks of destroyers in the South China Sea. It was the stance of someone for whom violence was not an event, but a language. The bouncer, Decker, puffed out his chest, emboldened by her lack of reaction, mistaking discipline for fear. He was about to learn a lesson that would be etched into the soul of this town for decades to come, a lesson about the vast, silent ocean of competence that lies beneath a calm surface. If you believe that true strength is measured not in noise, but in quiet professionalism, type respect in the comments below, because the story of this quiet woman was about to become a legend, and the echoes of what happened next would never truly fade. The admiral knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the bouncer had not just slapped a woman. He had poked a sleeping dragon, and the fire was coming. The entire room was holding its breath, waiting for the tears, the retreat, the predictable end to an ugly but common spectacle. They were all about to be profoundly, irrevocably wrong. Decker, basking in the glow of his perceived victory, leaned in closer, his breath a foul cloud of stale beer and self-satisfaction. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" He sneered, his voice dripping with condescending mockery. "I said get out. Or do I need to throw you out?" He gestured vaguely toward the door with a thumb the size of sausage, playing to his audience. The nervous laughter from the onlookers grew a little bolder, a collective endorsement of his casual cruelty. They saw what he saw, a frail-looking woman, isolated and intimidated, a textbook example of a victim. They saw her plain clothes and unassuming demeanor as evidence of weakness. They saw her silence as proof of fear. They saw her stillness as the paralysis of someone who had been cowed into submission. He saw a problem to be removed, a disruption to his fragile kingdom of cheap thrills and loud music. He saw an easy win, a story he could embellish for his friends later, casting himself as the tough but fair protector of his domain. He saw everything on the surface, every misleading clue that confirmed his shallow, prejudiced worldview. But the narrator of reality, the unseen force that writes the truth of things, saw something entirely different. He did not see the years of brutal, relentless training etched into the woman's very muscle memory. He did not see the hardened discipline that allowed her to control her heart rate, to slow her breathing, to turn the surge of adrenaline from a panic flood into a cold, focused river of pure potential. He did not see the calculus happening behind her calm, dark eyes, a constant, subconscious assessment of threats, exits, angles, and vulnerabilities. She wasn't just looking at him, she was mapping him. She had registered the slight imbalance in his stance, the way he favored his right leg, the predictable arc of his movements, the exact distance required to shatter his jaw or sever a nerve cluster in his neck. She was a master of a deadly craft, and this bar was merely a different kind of terrain, Decker a different kind of target, but the principles remained the same. Her focus was absolute. She was not ignoring him out of fear. She was categorizing him as a non-critical threat, a piece of environmental noise to be managed, not engaged. Her mission here was simple: to wait for a friend who was running late. Everything else was secondary. The slap, the insults, the laughter, they were data points processed and filed away with an unnerving lack of emotion. In his corner, Admiral Vance felt a jolt of recognition so profound it was almost physical. It was the stillness. That was the key. He'd seen it in the eyes of his best Tier 1 operators before a high-risk insertion, a state of being they called combat calm. It was a place beyond fear, beyond anger, a state of pure, lethal presence. He remembered a young chief petty officer, call sign Echo, who had once held that same unnerving calm while single-handedly holding a breached compound in the Karangal Valley for 3 hours, waiting for extraction. The official report was a masterpiece of redacted understatement, but the whispers that came back with the survivors painted a picture of something almost supernatural. Vance squinted, trying to see her face more clearly in the dim light. The memory was a decade old, but the posture, the combat chassis as the old hands called it, was identical. The air in the bar grew thick with a tension no one, but the Admiral and the woman, could truly understand. It was the feeling of a storm gathering just over the horizon, a storm that Decker, in his monumental arrogance, had mistaken for a clear sky. He was a man shouting at a tidal wave, completely oblivious to the sheer, destructive power he was about to unleash upon himself and everyone in that room. He was a gatekeeper of a tiny, insignificant door, and he was about to be washed away by an ocean of earned, silent competence. The standoff, thick with Decker's bluster and the woman's profound silence, was shattered not by a word or a punch, but by the violent splintering of wooden glass. The front door of the Stillwater Saloon burst inward, kicked off its hinges with a single, brutal impact. 3 figures clad in black hoodies and ski masks stormed into the room, their movements clumsy but filled with a desperate, volatile energy. One brandished a sawed-off shotgun, its wide mouth a black hole that seemed to suck all the noise and life out of the bar. Another held a rusty tire iron, and the third waved a long, wicked-looking hunting knife. Nobody move. Wallets and phones on the tables now. The man with the shotgun roared, his voice cracking with a mixture of adrenaline and amateur fear. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The fragile social order of the bar dissolved into pure, primal panic. A woman screamed. A chair clattered to the floor as someone scrambled to hide. The confident laughter that had filled the room moments before was replaced by whimpers and terrified gasps. And Decker, the self-proclaimed king of this domain, the mountain of a man who had just demonstrated his strength on a lone woman, completely and utterly froze. His face, which had been a mask of arrogant contempt, slackened into a canvas of pure, unadulterated terror. His hands, which had been clenched into fists, now hung uselessly at his sides. All his volume, all his bravado, was a hollow shell, and the first tap of genuine danger had shattered it into a million pieces. He was a caricature of a tough guy, exposed as a fraud in the face of a real threat. The patrons cowered, fumbling with their wallets, their eyes wide with fear. But the woman at the bar did not move. Or rather, the chaos did not move her. For her, the world did not speed up, it slowed down. The shouting, the screams, the clatter of glass. It all receded, becoming a distant, muffled soundtrack to the tactical problem that had just presented itself. The arrival of the robbers had not introduced chaos into her world. It had introduced clarity. This was a language she understood. This was a puzzle she had solved 100 times before in 100 different hellholes around the globe. Her breathing remained even, her heart rate a steady, metronomic beat. Her eyes, which had been distant, now sharpened with an intensity that was almost incandescent. She wasn't seeing masked men. She was seeing threat vectors. Shotgun, 12-gauge pump. Effective range in this spread is 5 meters, currently aimed at the center mass of the room, a poor tactical choice. Tire iron, held by the man on the left, poor grip, telegraphs his swings. Knife on the right, held in a reverse grip by someone who has seen too many movies, leaving his entire torso exposed. 3 hostiles, multiple civilian noncombatants. 1 primary threat with a ranged weapon. 1 exit blocked, another behind the bar. Her mind processed the information with the speed of a supercomputer, constructing and deconstructing a dozen different scenarios in the space of a single heartbeat. Decker, now trembling on the floor where he'd stumbled in his panic, looked up and saw her face. The vacant, passive expression was gone. In its place was something he could not comprehend, a look of such profound focus and competence it seemed alien. It was the look of a master craftsman seeing a piece of flawed material that needed to be corrected, of a surgeon identifying a cancer that needed to be excised. In that moment, the quiet woman ceased to be a person to him. She became a force of nature, and she was just beginning to move. Her first movement was not an attack, but a simple, fluid motion of conservation and opportunity. As the shotgun-wielding leader turned to gesture at the terrified bartender, the woman's hand, the same hand that had been resting placidly on the bar, snaked out and closed around a heavy glass beer stein. She didn't snatch it. She acquired it. The motion so economical it was almost invisible. The second hostile, the man with the tire iron, noticed her movement and charged, his face a snarl of aggression inside his mask. He raised the iron high, a clumsy, telegraph swing from a mile away. It was a fatal mistake. She did not retreat. She flowed forward, moving inside the arc of his swing with a grace that defied the laws of physics. As the tire iron whistled harmlessly over her head, she brought the heavy stein up in a short, brutal arc, connecting with the side of his knee. The sound was not a crack, but a wet, sickening thud. The man's leg buckled instantly, his roar of aggression turning into a high-pitched shriek of agony as he collapsed to the floor, his weapon clattering uselessly beside him. She was already moving on. The third robber, the one with the knife, lunged at her, trying to capitalize on the moment. She pivoted on the ball of her foot, letting his momentum carry him past her. As he stumbled, her free hand shot out, not in a punch, but with fingers held rigidly together like a spear. The strike landed perfectly at the base of his skull, where the spine meets the cranium. His eyes rolled back into his head, and he dropped like a marionette whose strings had been cut, completely unconscious before he hit the sawdust-covered floor. 2 down. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. The leader, hearing the commotion, spun back around, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. He brought the shotgun to bear on her, his hands fumbling with the pump action. But she was no longer there. In the instant he had turned, she had vaulted over the bar with the silent agility of a cat, landing in a crouch behind the solid oak counter. The bartender was huddled there, paralyzed with fear. "Stay down," she said, her voice calm and even, the first words anyone had heard her speak. They were not a plea or a suggestion. They were a command. The robber, now enraged and panicked, fired a blast into the front of the bar, sending a shower of splintered wood and varnish into the air. He racked the pump for another shot. It was the last mistake he would ever make in his short-lived criminal career. As he worked the action, she rose from behind the bar, a full bottle of whiskey in each hand. In one smooth, continuous motion, she threw the first bottle like a fastball, not at his head, but at his chest. It struck him with surprising force, staggering him backward, his aim disrupted. In that split second of imbalance, she was over the bar again, closing the distance. Before he could recover, she brought the second bottle down in a vicious, precise strike on his wrist, shattering both the bottle and the bones in his hand. He screamed and dropped the shotgun. Her follow-through was a palm heel strike to his nose, driving cartilage up into his sinus cavity. He collapsed onto his back, incapacitated and gasping in a tide of his own blood. Then silence. A profound, deafening silence descended upon the Stillwater saloon, broken only by the whimpering of the injured robber and the ragged, terrified breathing of the patrons. The entire brutal ballet of violence had lasted no more than 10 seconds. 10 seconds of impossible speed, precision, and economy of motion. The woman stood in the center of the room, breathing easily, not even flushed from the exertion. She scanned the room one last time, her eyes ensuring all threats were neutralized. Decker, still on the floor, stared at her, his mouth hanging open, his mind utterly incapable of processing what he had just witnessed. He had insulted her. He had mocked her. He had slapped her. And she had just dismantled 3 armed men as if they were unruly children. A single, whispered phrase escaped his lips, a pathetic testament to his shattered reality. That's not possible. In the corner, Admiral Vance slowly got to his feet, a look of grim, absolute certainty on his face. He knew exactly who she was now, and he knew that the legend of Echo was not only real, but had just been written into the history of this forgotten little town. The wail of sirens grew from a distant cry to an insistent scream, and moments later, the splintered doorway was filled with the silhouettes of local police officers, weapons drawn, their faces taut with apprehension. They swept into the room, their training kicking in, shouting commands to a crowd that was already frozen in a state of collective shock. Police! Everybody on the ground! Show me your hands! Their eyes took in the scene. The 3 masked men, neutralized and groaning on the floor. The terrified patrons huddled under tables. The shotgun lying inert in the center of the room. And then they saw her. The quiet woman, standing calmly amidst the wreckage. Her posture relaxed but aware, her hands empty and visible at her sides. To them, in the chaotic first moments, she was just another variable in a violent equation, potentially the most dangerous one. You! On the ground now, a young sergeant yelled, his pistol leveled squarely at her chest. She didn't move. She simply met his gaze, her expression unreadable. She understood his position, the protocol, the need to control the scene. She was not a threat to him, and she knew it. But before the situation could escalate, a new voice cut through the tension, a voice that carried an ingrained, effortless authority that made every head in the room turn. Stand down, Sergeant. Admiral Vance stepped out from his corner booth, moving with a purpose that belied his age. He walked calmly into the center of the room, placing himself between the officers and the woman. The sergeant, startled by the intervention, bristled. Sir, this is a crime scene. I need you to step back. Vance didn't even look at him. His eyes were fixed on the woman, a flicker of immense, profound respect in their depths. He reached into his jacket, moving slowly and deliberately, and produced a simple black leather wallet. He flipped it open to reveal the unmistakable gold shield and identification of a retired 4-star admiral of the United States Navy. The sergeant's eyes widened, his aggressive posture deflating in an instant. Admiral, sir, he stammered. I apologize, Vance gave curt nod. As you were, Sergeant, your men have done well to secure the scene, but you have made a mistake in your threat assessment. He gestured with his head toward the woman, who had remained perfectly still throughout the exchange. That woman, he said, his voice dropping slightly, taking on a tone of reverent gravity, is the reason you are processing a crime scene instead of a massacre. The reason every single civilian in this bar is still breathing is her. The sergeant looked from the admiral to the woman and back again, his face a mask of confusion. He saw a small, unassuming woman in a t-shirt. He saw the carnage around her. The 2 images refused to reconcile in his mind. Sir, with all due respect, who is she? Vance paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. He knew that what he was about to do was a breach of protocol, a violation of the silent code that protected people like her. But he also knew that justice, in this moment, demanded the truth. He looked at the officers, at the stunned patrons, and especially at Decker, who was now propped up against the bar, his face pale as a sheet. "Her name," the Admiral began, his voice clear and resonant, filling every corner of the silent room, "is Chief Petty Officer Maya Cale. And you, Sergeant, and everyone else in this room are standing in the presence of a living legend. You are looking at one of the most decorated and effective special operators this country has ever produced." The Admiral's words hung in the air, heavy and immutable as granite. The title, Chief Petty Officer, was a familiar one, respectable to be sure, but it didn't fully explain the impossible scene before them. The sergeant opened his mouth to ask another question, but Vance raised a hand, silencing him. The Admiral knew that names and ranks were insufficient. The truth of who Maya Cale was could not be conveyed. It had to be unveiled. He turned his piercing gaze from the sergeant to the assembled onlookers, his voice taking on the rhythmic, staccato cadence of a citation being read at a state funeral. "Unit, Naval Special Warfare Development Group," he began, the name itself, the official designation for SEAL Team 6, causing a sharp intake of breath from a young officer who understood its significance. "Call sign, Echo," he continued, the name a whisper of myth in the special operations community. "Combat déploiement, Cervantine." From the mountains of Tora Bora to the deserts of Al Anbar, from the jungles of the Philippines to the failed states of the Horn of Africa, each location was a chapter in a brutal, secret history of the modern world. Medals. Vance's voice grew harder, each word a hammer blow against the walls of their disbelief. The Navy Cross, for actions taken during Operation Neptune Spear. 2 Silver Stars for gallantry under fire in locations that remain classified. 5 Bronze Stars, all with Valor Device, for heroism in direct combat with enemy forces. He paused, letting the sheer weight of her accolades sink in. The Navy Cross, the second highest award for valor in the entire United States military. The room was so quiet you could hear the frantic, terrified heartbeat of the robber with the broken knee. Mission classifications. Vance's voice dropped to a near whisper, laden with the gravity of state secrets. Redacted. Redacted. Top secret / sensitive compartmented information. Redacted. The repeated word redacted was more powerful than any description, a testament to a life lived so deep in the shadows that most of it was officially denied to exist. He then turned his full attention back to the lead police officer. "Sergeant, the only reason Chief Cale isn't a 4-star general or a national monument is because 99% of what she has accomplished for this country is so profoundly classified it will never, ever see the light of day. The men she just put down with a beer stein and her bare hands are lucky to be breathing. I have personally seen her neutralize targets from over a mile away with a sniper rifle in a crosswind. I have read after-action reports, heavily redacted reports, that credit her with saving entire platoons. She is not just a soldier. She's a scalpel wielded by the nation in the dark, where no one is watching. Then Vance did something that sealed the moment in legend. He turned to face Maya Cale. He straightened his back, drew himself up to his full height, and executed a slow, perfect, formal salute. A retired 4-star admiral, a man who had commanded fleets and advised presidents, saluting a chief petty officer. In the rigid hierarchy of the military, it was a gesture of respect so profound it was almost a form of worship. It was an acknowledgement that rank was irrelevant in the face of true, undeniable, and legendary competence. The police officers, understanding the immense significance of the gesture, instinctively followed his lead. They lowered their weapons, their expressions of suspicion replaced by ones of pure, unadulterated awe. Decker, from his pathetic perch on the floor, watched the scene unfold, and a wave of nauseating shame washed over him, so powerful it almost made him physically ill. He had not just misjudged a person, he had committed a sacrilege. The immediate aftermath was handled with a quiet, almost reverent efficiency. The local police, now fully understanding the situation, treated Maya Cale not as a suspect, but as an invaluable asset. Her statement was brief, clinical, and devoid of any emotion or embellishment. 3 armed hostiles entered the establishment, presenting a lethal threat to civilian life. I engaged and neutralized the threats. That was all she offered, and it was all that was needed. She refused medical attention, signed the necessary paperwork with a steady hand, and then, before the news crews and gawkers could arrive, she slipped out of back in trance and vanished into the night, disappearing as quietly as she had lived. She wanted no part of the story, no share of the credit. For her, it had been a simple matter of professional responsibility. But the story did not vanish with her. It exploded. In the age of smartphones and social media, a secret is a commodity, and this secret was pure gold. It started with the hushed, awestruck whispers of the police officers who had been on the scene. It was amplified by the shaky, adrenaline-fueled accounts of the patrons who had witnessed the impossible. Within hours, the story of what happened at the Stillwater Saloon was the #1 topic of conversation at the nearby naval base. It tore through the barracks and training facilities like a wildfire, passed from sailor to sailor in hushed tones, each retelling adding a thin new layer of myth to the core of unbelievable fact. It soon leaked beyond the base, hitting military forums and private social media groups dedicated to the special operations community. They gave the incident a name. The Stillwater Saloon engagement, blurry cell phone pictures of the aftermath, the splintered bar, the unconscious robbers, the stunned look on Decker's face, became viral artifacts, passed around with captions like, "This is what happens when you mess with a true quiet professional." The legend of Echo at Stillwater was born. The story became a digital campfire tale, a modern parable about the dangers of assumption. People debated the specifics of her hand-to-hand technique, analyzed the physics of her movements, and marveled at the sheer audacity of it all. For the community of warriors who lived by a code of silence and competence, she became an instant icon, a perfect embodiment of their highest ideals. And Decker, the bouncer, became the story's fool. He was fired the next day, his name and face plastered across local news reports, a permanent symbol of loud-mouthed arrogance getting its comeuppance. He became a cautionary tale, a meme, a punchline. The public humiliation was absolute. He lost his job, his reputation, and the hollow sense of superiority that had defined his entire identity. He was forced to confront the chasm between the man he pretended to be and the terrified, useless bystander he had actually been when true danger arrived. The slap he had delivered in a moment of pathetic dominance was replayed for him 1,000 times over in the court of public opinion, each time followed by the story of the quiet woman who had answered his ignorance not with words, but with an act of sublime and terrifying competence that had saved a dozen lives and shattered his world forever. He had tried to make her small, and in doing so, had revealed only how small he truly was. In the weeks that followed, the story of the Stillwater Saloon engagement began its slow transformation from sensational news into enduring legend. For Maya Cale, the transition was seamless because she was already gone. True to her nature, she had requested and been granted an immediate transfer to an undisclosed training facility. She left no forwarding address, answered no calls from reporters, and made no public statements. Her official military file remained sealed, a black hole of redacted missions and classified commendations. Her only contribution to the legend was her conspicuous and total absence. She had no interest in fame or recognition. For the quiet professional, the work is the only reward, and silence is the only sanctuary. Her departure left a vacuum that was quickly filled by the stories of others, stories that focused on the lessons learned from her brief, explosive appearance. The most profound transformation was that of Decker. After weeks of hiding from the public shame, drowning his sorrows in the same kind of cheap whiskey he used to serve, he hit rock bottom. The memory of Admiral Vance's salute, of the profound respect shown to the woman he had assaulted, played on a loop in his mind. It wasn't her skill that haunted him. It was her character. It was the calm, the discipline, the utter lack of ego. He realized that true strength wasn't about the noise you made or the space you occupied. It was about the competence you held in reserve, the character you revealed under pressure. One morning, he woke up a changed man. He walked into the local Veterans Affairs Center, a place he'd never had a reason to visit, and asked if they needed volunteers. The director, a grizzled old Marine gunnery sergeant with a prosthetic leg and an eye that could spot a lie from 100 yards, took one look at the infamous ex-bouncer and grunted. "Why should I give you the time of day?" Decker didn't make excuses. He didn't try to justify his past. He looked the gunny in the eye and said, with a humility he had never before known, "Because I recently met someone who taught me what real service and strength look like. And I realized I've spent my whole life getting it wrong. I want to learn how to get it right." The gunny saw the truth in his eyes and gave him a chance. Decker started by mopping floors and cleaning bathrooms. He was quiet, diligent, and respectful. He listened to the stories of the veterans, men and women who had faced real adversity, who bore the visible and invisible scars of true sacrifice. He learned that their strength was quiet, forged in shared hardship, not in loud boasts. He was, in his own way, paying a quiet, lifelong penance, transformed by his 10-second encounter with greatness. Back at the Stillwater Saloon, the owner, a pragmatic man named Sal, resisted every impulse to capitalize on the notoriety. He turned down offers from TV shows and documentary crews. Instead, he repaired the door, patched the holes in the bar, and did something remarkable. He mounted a small, discreet brass plaque on the wall near the spot where Maya had been sitting. It didn't bear her name or mention the incident. It simply read, "Respect is earned in silence." It became an unspoken tribute, a quiet acknowledgement that something profound had happened there, a lesson that was too important to be turned into a cheap commodity. The bar became a different kind of place, a little quieter, a little more thoughtful, a place where people knew that the measure of a person was not always visible to the naked eye. 5 years passed. The world moved on, as it always does. But in the ecosystem of the United States military, and especially within the naval special warfare community, 5 years is not a long time. It is long enough for a story to shed its factual skin and grow a new one made of pure legend. The tale of Echo at Stillwater was no longer a piece of gossip. It was institutional folklore. It was a story told to new recruits shivering on the cold, wet sands of Coronado during Hell Week, a story whispered by instructors to BUD/S candidates struggling to understand the ethos of the quiet professional. It was never written down in any training manual, never officially acknowledged. It didn't have to be. Its power was in its oral tradition, passed down from one generation of warriors to the next. The story served a vital purpose. It was a parable about the poison of assumption. It taught young, ambitious sailors that the most dangerous person in any room is almost never the loudest, the biggest, or the most decorated. It taught them that true competence requires no announcement. That skill is its own credential. The story of Decker's humiliation was used as a lesson in humility, a reminder that underestimating an opponent based on gender, size, or any other superficial trait was a catastrophic and potentially fatal error in judgment. The legend of Maya Kale became a teaching tool, a personification of the ideal warrior, silent, disciplined, underestimated, and overwhelmingly effective when stirred to action. The Stillwater Saloon itself became an unofficial landmark. It was a place where off-duty SEALs and other special operators would go for a quiet drink, a place of unspoken understanding. They would sit at the bar, see the small brass plaque, and nod to each other. No words were needed. They were all part of the same silent order, and this was one of their chapels. They were there to honor the ghost of Echo, to pay tribute to the standard she had set. The man who often served them their drinks was quiet, respectful, and moved with a calm efficiency. It was Decker. After 2 years of volunteering at the VA, the old gunny had recommended him for a management position. He had excelled. He had found his true calling not in asserting dominance, but in genuine service. Sal, the bar owner, had heard about Decker's transformation and, in an act of profound grace, offered him his old job back, but as a manager. Decker had politely declined, content with his new life, but he would come in once a week to pour drinks, just to stay connected to the place that had so violently and completely altered the course of his life. He never spoke of the incident unless a young sailor, full of swagger and ignorance, started making the same mistakes he once had. Then, Decker would quietly pull the young man aside and tell him a story about a quiet woman and a lesson learned in 10 brutal seconds of silence. His redemption was not a single act, but a continuous process, a living legacy of the night his arrogance was shattered by an angel in a plain gray t-shirt. The lesson had been passed on. The legacy of that night was not a scar on the town, but a subtle shift in its consciousness, a quiet recalibration of its understanding of strength. It wasn't about the broken bones or the shattered door. It was about the shattered assumptions. The story of Maya Kale became a permanent fixture in the local culture, a modern myth that served to remind people of a timeless truth, that what you see is rarely the whole story. True worth is not declared in a loud voice or displayed in a show of force. It is demonstrated in quiet action, in the calm execution of a difficult task under immense pressure. Her competence was an answer to Decker's arrogance, a definitive, nonverbal refutation of his entire worldview. He had judged the book by its cover and found himself illiterate in the face of the complex, dangerous, and heroic text written on its pages. The Admiral's salute was the exclamation point on that lesson, a public declaration that the hierarchies men create, rank, size, volume, are meaningless when confronted with the earned authority of pure, undeniable skill. Her legacy, therefore, was not in the memory of the violence, but in the enduring lesson of humility. It lived on in the quiet diligence of Decker at the VA Center, a man remade by his own shame. It lived on in the respectful silence of the operators who visited the Stillwater Saloon, paying homage to an ethos she perfectly embodied. It lived on in the minds of the young police officers who had been there, who now looked at every situation with a deeper sense of caution, forever cured of the disease of underestimation. The greatest legacies are not statues in a park or names on a building. They are ideas, principles that are woven into the fabric of a community and passed down through generations. The idea she left behind was simple and profound. Respect is the currency of the competent, and it is earned not by demanding it, but by being so good, so disciplined, and so professional that it is given freely, often in the form of awestruck silence. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in a hail of noise and glory. It's what continues forward in the quiet discipline of those you inspire. It's a lesson taught not in a lecture hall, but in the deafening silence that follows an act of pure, undeniable competence, a lesson written in the universal language of action, which speaks louder and with more authority than any word ever could. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.